Will Grant there on that border. Well, in the studio with me now is Dr. Sarah Singer, Senior Lecturer at the University of London's Refugee Law Initiative. Thanks for joining us. All nations are signed up to international law on accepting asylum seekers, whether they come into a country legally or illegally. Can you just explain briefly what that is?
Well, it's a really foundational principle, not only of the US domestic law, but of all countries who signed up to the International Refugee Convention of 1951, that asylum seekers shouldn't be penalised for the means by which they enter a country, be it legally or illegally. So if we think back to the Second World War, for example, we had large numbers of German Jews who were trying to escape Nazi persecution, and one of the primary problems that they faced was being able to access a country in which they could secure protection. And this has been a really important facet of every refugee-producing crisis that we've seen in the 20th century and before, and going forward. So for this reason, it's a really important principle that asylum seekers aren't penalised for entering a country illegally.
So how did President Trump put through his order?
Well, the United States has international obligations, as do the majority of countries worldwide. However, the way that law is implemented into the United States is that there has to be internal domestic legislation which gives effect to the international obligations, and this is the basis on which the judge struck down the President Trump's proclamation.
So the judge has said what exactly now? And it's only a temporary ban, isn't it?
It has to be stressed, this is only temporary. So the judge has said that President Trump's proclamation is contrary to domestic law in the United States, which provides that individuals can claim asylum regardless of how they entered the country. This is just a temporary injunction, so it gives the court a month to review and consider and determine whether the injunction needs to be extended further.
What will happen next if they do extend it? Can the White House challenge that?
That's something that I'm not sure about. Yes.
Okay, asking you details of US law. But what does this mean, though, in practice for the people that we've just seen in that report?
Well, in practice, the proclamation effectively meant that people had to choose between trying to enter the United States via these regular ports of entry or crossing irregularly. Trying to enter via these regular ports of entry, these ports already had faced huge backlogs. People were being forced to wait for days, for weeks, extended over month periods. And it has to be stressed that a large number of these people, their families, they're women with young children, they're unaccompanied minors, so effectively prolonging a very precarious situation in which they're in. For those who had attempted to or had crossed irregularly into the United States, the effect of President Trump's proclamation was that they couldn't effectively claim asylum in the United States. So while the United States has obligations not to return those people to a country where they might face torture or serious rights violations, effectively they would have been without a regular status in the country, perhaps subject to prolonged or indefinite detention and without all the rights accruing with refugee status.
Just briefly, was President Trump using arguments about national security to override the US obligations on the refugee law? And if he wanted to, could he just pull the United States out of that convention, or does it have to go through Congress?
The official rationale behind the proclamation was that processing on the southern border, the processing centres were overwhelmed, there was a huge backlog of cases, and therefore individuals needed to go through these regular processes. In practice, it all seems to be part of this very divisive political rhetoric surrounding migration, asylum, irregular migration, that has been a very mainstay of President Trump's campaigning.
We're seeing it right around the world, of course.
And of course came to the fore in relation to this particular group of migrants last month with the upcoming midterm elections.
Dr. Sarah Singer, thank you very much indeed for answering these rather tricky questions. We appreciate your time.